A lavish ballroom, crystal glasses chiming, every eye drifting toward one table. Petra, voice like honey, pitched perfectly for the two nearest tables to catch. Eleanor, perhaps Grant should arrange a personal aid for you. These events are getting a little difficult for you, aren't they? Eleanor, 74 years old, white hair, pale blue suit, sits perfectly straight. Her face does not move, but her hands, folded in her lap, are trembling. From the back of the room, a woman stands up. A chair scrapes against marble. Heads turn. Diane, the ex-wife, walks straight toward the head table. No rush, no hesitation. She bends down, picks up the program from the floor, places it into Eleanor's hands. Holds them, just for a moment. Diane, low enough for only Eleanor to hear, voice warm and steady. Eleanor, you look absolutely beautiful today. Eleanor looks at her. 1 second. Something behind the old woman's eyes cracks open, then holds itself together. Petra says nothing. She thought the old woman had been replaced. What she didn't know, the woman who sat down beside Eleanor that afternoon had never truly left. This is the story of a woman who learned to stand at her full size and changed an entire room without raising her voice once. If you want to know what happens next, keep reading because the real story is only just beginning. The sound came first, crystal glasses touching, polite laughter, heels on marble floor. Diane Calloway stood at the entrance of the Hargrove Hotel ballroom and told herself one more time that she could still leave. She had told Carol she wasn't coming 3 separate times. On Tuesday over the phone, on Thursday by text, on Friday morning, standing in Carol's bakery with a coffee in her hand, saying it out loud like a commitment, and yet here she was. The annual Ridgemont Women's Charity Luncheon, a room full of women who had known her as Grant Calloway's wife, who now knew her as Grant Calloway's ex-wife. There was a difference in how they said it. A small hesitation before the word ex. A tiny upward note, like a question, like something that had once been valid but had since expired. She smoothed the front of her navy-wrapped dress. She had bought it 2 months ago. She had almost returned it twice. It fit well. She looked beautiful in it. She was still working on believing that. She chose a seat near the back. Safe. Peripheral. She had gotten comfortable with peripheral over the past 2 years. It required less from her, less performance, less explaining, less of the particular exhaustion that came from walking into a room where people were deciding how to categorize you. She ordered sparkling water from a passing server and scanned the room. The tables were dressed in white linen, centerpieces of pale roses and greenery. The kind of event Eleanor Calloway had organized with absolute precision for 11 consecutive years. It was in many ways Eleanor's room, and then Diane saw her. Eleanor was at the head table, straight-backed, white-haired, wearing a pale blue suit that Diane recognized from 3 Christmases ago. She looked composed and present and entirely herself. Petra Voss was sitting next to her. Diane noticed this the way you notice a sound that's slightly wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just off. Petra was 32, polished in a way that required maintenance. Dark hair, sharp features, a red dress that announced her presence in every room she entered. She had been Grant's events coordinator before she became his girlfriend, before she became the reason the marriage ended, or rather one of the reasons. Diane had spent a year in therapy learning that affairs were rarely the cause of anything. They were usually the symptom. The speeches began. A young woman spoke about the mentorship program the charity funded. Her voice was steady and earnest. Diane wasn't fully listening. She was watching the head table. She saw it happen in stages. Eleanor reached for the program on the table in front of her. Her right hand moved toward it slowly. Eleanor had been having hand tremors for about a year. Nothing serious, her doctor had said. Just the body negotiating the terms of its own age. The program slid off the edge of the table. It fell quietly. The kind of fall that made almost no sound at all. Eleanor bent to reach it, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned to move through the world without rushing. Petra did not move to help. She watched. And then, in a voice calibrated perfectly, just loud enough for the 2 nearest tables to catch, she said, "Eleanor, maybe we should have Grant arrange a home aid for you. These events are getting a bit difficult." Difficult. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. The nearby tables went quiet, not silent. Just that particular kind of quiet that means everyone heard and no one is looking directly at the thing that just happened. Eleanor straightened herself upright, slowly, with precision. Her face did not change. That was the devastating part. 74 years of practiced dignity. She knew exactly how to absorb a blow without flinching. She had been doing it her whole life. She was doing it right now, in her own room, at her own luncheon, wearing the pale blue suit. But her hands now folded in her lap, were trembling, harder than before. Diane set down her sparkling water. She was not thinking. She was not planning. She was operating from something older than thought. Something that lived in the chest, not the brain. The part of you that moves before the rest of you catches up. She stood up. Her chair made a small sound on the marble. A few people nearby looked at her. She didn't look back. She walked toward the head table, past the round tables of women in their good clothes, past the flower arrangements and the half-eaten salads and the gentle hum of a room that was pretending nothing had happened. Her heels on the marble floor, click, click, click. She arrived at the head table. She leaned down without ceremony and picked up Eleanor's program from the floor. She placed it in Eleanor's hands, both of them. She held Eleanor's hands for just a moment. Then she pulled an empty chair from the neighboring table. She sat down next to Eleanor, on Eleanor's other side. Between Eleanor and the room, she did not look at Petra. She said quietly, "With full attention, Eleanor, you look absolutely beautiful today." Eleanor looked at her. For a moment, just one moment, something moved across the old woman's face. Something that had been held very tightly released itself. Just slightly, just enough. "Diane," she said, just the name, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Diane folded her hands on the table. She looked toward the stage, where the speaker had recovered her footing and was continuing her remarks. She sat straight. She kept her face warm and still. She did not perform anything. She was simply present. That was all. She was simply there. Petra said nothing. The table said nothing. The particular silence around them had texture and weight. The luncheon continued. Afterward, in the hotel lobby, Eleanor was finding her coat. A friend had brought it from the cloakroom. There was the small business of buttons and scarves, and a handbag that needed rearranging. Diane stood nearby, not hovering, just present. Petra had already left. There had been a brief exchange of goodbyes at the table, precise, surface level. The social performance of a woman who understood she'd misjudged the room and was choosing strategic retreat. Diane watched her go without expression. Margaret Winslow appeared at her elbow. Margaret was 68 years old, with iron gray hair and a strand of pearls she had worn to every significant social occasion in Ridgemont for the past 30 years. She was the kind of woman whose opinion carried the specific gravity of accumulated decades. When Margaret Winslow said something quietly to you, you understood it was not casual. She stopped beside Diane. She did not look at her directly. She looked at the lobby, at the women moving toward the exit, at the particular choreography of a social event winding down. She said, low and precise, "That girl has been doing this for months. Every event, every gathering where Eleanor is present, she makes sure Eleanor understands she no longer belongs, that she is the old version of a family that is being replaced." Diane was very still. "And Grant?" she asked. Margaret's expression shifted. Not surprise. Something more like patience. "Grant has been told," she said, multiple times, by Eleanor herself, by others who care about that woman. He says Petra doesn't mean it, that she's nervous, that Eleanor should give her more time." The lobby air felt suddenly cooler. Diane knew those words. She had heard them in different configurations throughout her marriage. The gentle redirection. The explanation that asked her to understand rather than be understood. "I'm glad you came today," Margaret said. She turned now and looked at Diane directly. Her gaze was clear and deliberate. "We were wondering when you would." She walked away. Her heels quiet on the lobby marble. Diane stood alone for a moment. Her sparkling water was still sitting on a table at the back of the ballroom. She had left it there when she stood up. She didn't go back for it. She pushed through the hotel's glass door into the afternoon. Outside, the October air was cool and sharp with the smell of fallen leaves and car exhaust. She walked to her car. She got in. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel. "We were wondering when you would," like it had already been decided, like she had already been expected. She thought about Eleanor's hands, how they trembled in her lap, how the trembling got worse after Petra spoke. She thought about the word difficult. She thought about the 11 years she had attended that luncheon as Grant Calloway's wife, sitting at the head table, never near the exit. She started the car. She drove home through streets lined with October trees. She did not know yet what she had walked back into. She only knew that she could not have done anything differently. That was the strange part. It hadn't been a choice. It had been simply who she was. For the first time in 2 years, that knowledge felt like something solid, something she could stand on. 2 days later, 6:45 in the morning. Diane was in her studio on the north side of town before the sun had fully decided to commit to the day. She had been there since 4. She hadn't slept well. When sleep failed her, she worked, and she had learned over the past 2 years not to fight that instinct. The studio was small and completely hers. Commercial lease, second floor, north-facing windows that gave good light by mid-morning. Every surface had something on it. Paint samples fanned across one table. Fabric swatches pinned to a corkboard. Client mood boards in various states of completion leaning against the walls. She had built this business during her marriage. Quietly, in the hours that fell between school pickups and dinner parties, and the full-time work of managing a household built around Grant Calloway's professional life. She had been good at the design work from the beginning. She had a way of listening to clients that other designers didn't always have. She didn't just hear what they said they wanted. She heard what they were actually describing, the feeling they wanted to walk into when they came home. Grant had called it her little business, not unkindly, just with the particular diminishment of a man who measured things by scale. It was small compared to his world, therefore it was small. She had believed him for longer than she should have. Her phone buzzed on the work table. Eleanor Calloway. She looked at the name. She took a breath. She answered. Diane. Eleanor's voice was careful, measured, but underneath the measurement, something tired, something that had been carrying weight for a long time. I want to talk to you. Properly. Not at an event. Not somewhere public. They met at Eleanor's house at 10 o'clock, the same house where Diane had eaten Sunday dinners for 12 years, the same front hallway with the cedar umbrella stand and the framed botanical prints along the staircase wall. It smelled like cedar and something floral. There had been a candle, a specific candle Eleanor always burned in the afternoon. Diane had known its name once. She couldn't retrieve it now. The forgetting felt like a small, specific grief. Eleanor made tea. She insisted on making it herself. Diane sat at the kitchen table and watched and did not offer to help. Because Eleanor's dignity was not Diane's to manage. It never had been. The kettle, the cups, the careful placement of spoons. They sat. Eleanor wrapped both hands around her mug. She has been doing this since February, Eleanor said. At first I thought I was being too sensitive. You know how I've always worried about that. An old woman who's set in her ways, resistant to change. Seeing slights where there are only social adjustments. She paused. But it wasn't sensitivity, she said. I know the difference by now. It was pattern recognition. Every gathering, every social occasion, every dinner. She makes sure I understand that I am an inconvenience, that I represent something she is replacing, that my presence in this family requires management. Diane was very still. February, she thought. 8 months ago. 8 months of this. Does Grant know? She asked. Eleanor's expression did something complicated. It moved through several things quickly and then settled somewhere careful. Grant has been told, she said. I've told him myself, directly, twice. He says she doesn't mean it, that she is nervous around me and it expresses itself poorly, that I should extend her more grace, that she is trying. The silence that followed that word trying was long. Diane knew that silence. She had lived inside it. It was the silence of being told that your perception of events required someone else's endorsement before it could be accepted as real, that the thing you clearly experienced needed to be filtered through the interpretation of the person who caused it. She had a word for that now. She had spent a year in therapy earning that word. I need to tell you something, Eleanor said. Her voice shifted, just slightly, lower, more deliberate. She set her mug down on the table. The affair started 3 years before you found out. Diane heard those words. She sat with them. She did not speak for a long moment. I didn't know for most of that time, Eleanor continued. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed this, who has decided to say it, who is not going to let herself stop. I suspected something, the way you suspect weather before you can see clouds, but I had no real reason. And I told myself I was projecting, that I was a mother who was too attached to her son's marriage. She paused. When I did know when I had actual reason to believe what I believed, I went to Grant. I told him he needed to end it, or he needed to tell you. He chose to tell you. I want you to know that. At least that much. 3 years. Diane did the arithmetic without meaning to. She could not stop herself. Not the 18 months she had been told. Not the version of the story where it happened fast and got complicated and spiraled beyond his control. 3 years. Oliver would have been in his junior year of high school. She had attended every sports dinner that year, every school event. She had driven Oliver to practice twice a week and sat in the bleachers and talked to the other parents and come home and made dinner and asked Grant about his day. For 3 years. Why are you telling me now? Diane asked. Her voice was very quiet. She was surprised by how quiet it was. Because you deserve to know it, Eleanor said. Because I have been carrying it, and I am tired of carrying things that belong to someone else. And because she stopped. She looked down at her tea, then she looked back up. Because you walked across that ballroom on Saturday and you sat down next to me, and I thought this woman deserves the truth. She has deserved it for a long time. Diane drove home in the wrong direction. She was 15 minutes from home when she realized she had turned north instead of south. The streets were unfamiliar. She had been driving without processing. She pulled into a gas station parking lot. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel. The clock on the dashboard read 10:47 in the morning. She watched a sparrow land on the gas pump directly across from her car. It pecked at something invisible on the metal surface, pecked twice, then flew away with no particular urgency. She thought about year 2, the February of year 2. Grant coming home 3 hours late every Thursday for 6 weeks. Client dinners, he had said. She had kept his dinner warm, every time, in a covered dish in the oven. She had made sure the food stayed good. She had made sure he ate. She thought about the 10th anniversary cruise, how she had planned every detail. how she had worn the blue dress, how he had looked at her across the dinner table on the ship and said she looked nice. Just nice. She had spent 3 weeks deciding what to pack. She thought about Oliver's high school graduation dinner. Grant on his phone, her touching his arm and saying his name, the way he looked at her when she did it. Like someone waking from a dream they were still inside. She started to cry. Not the photogenic kind, not the kind that looks like something, the real kind, the kind that takes over your whole face, the ugly, graceless, completely honest kind. The kind that only happens when you are alone in a gas station parking lot at 10:47 in the morning and you have finally truly stopped protecting yourself from the full size of something. She cried for the covered dish in the oven. She cried for the blue dress. She cried for the new pillows. The ones she bought in year 2 because she thought the bedroom needed something different, because she thought restlessness was something she could fix with new pillows. I reorganized our entire bedroom, she thought. I bought new pillows. I told a therapist I was going through a phase. I was not going through a phase. I was living in a house with someone who was already planning to leave, and I kept his dinner warm. She sat there for a long time. The sparrow came back, landed on the same pump, looked around at nothing in particular, left again. Eventually, the crying exhausted itself. She found a gas receipt in the cup holder and wiped her face with it. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were swollen. Her mascara had not survived the experience. She said it out loud, to no one, in a quiet voice. I was not crazy. I knew something was wrong. I just loved someone who wasn't worth my certainty. She sat with that sentence. Then she put the car in drive. She went home. She washed her face. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at her backyard garden. She had planted every single thing in it. She knew every plant by name. She had put them in the ground herself, with her own hands, in the first spring after the divorce. She thought, I am still here. I am still the person who plants things. Her phone buzzed. Carol, you've gone quiet since the luncheon. That means something happened. Bakery. Tonight. I'm making the cardamom ones. Diane typed back, I'll be there at 7. She set the phone down. She picked up her coffee. She stood at the window a little longer. 5 days after the meeting with Eleanor, Diane had a yellow legal pad on her studio work table. She used legal pads for things she needed to see in physical form. Client notes, project timelines, the specific measurements of a room that weren't going to make sense until she drew them by hand. Now she was using it for something different. She was not obsessing. She told herself this and mostly believed it. She was organizing. She needed to see the shape of the thing, the actual geometry of it. Because 3 years was an abstraction until you placed it against the specific texture of what those 3 years had actually contained. She started writing the February Thursdays, 6 weeks, 12 dinners in the oven, the cruise, 10 days in the Mediterranean. She had read 4 books and eaten breakfast alone every morning while Grant had his coffee on the deck and looked at his phone. Christmas. The jewelry he gave her. A bracelet. Fine, thoughtful looking, completely generic. The kind of thing you bought when you needed to hand someone something wrapped. She had thanked him warmly and worn it twice. She had believed it was the thought that counted. There had been no thought. Oliver's sophomore year. A period of about 4 months when Grant was unreachable most evenings. Work, always work. She had stopped asking about the details because the details were always the same. Meetings, clients, deals in progress. She had managed the household and Oliver's schedule and her clients, and she had not asked follow-up questions. She put the pen down. She looked at the legal pad. She had filled half a page, small, specific, dated memories, each one now carrying a different explanation than the one she had given it at the time. She thought about what it meant to be correct. To know something in your body that your mind refuses to accept. To feel the shape of a lie without being able to name it. To trust the person you love more than you trust your own perception. I was right, she thought. Every single time I felt something was wrong, I was right. I just kept choosing his version of reality over mine. She tore the page off the legal pad. She held it for a moment. Then she folded it carefully, not angrily, with a kind of precision, and she put it in her bag. She didn't know what she would do with it. She just knew she wasn't ready to throw it away and wasn't ready to look at it anymore. She called Carol. Carol picked up on the second ring. Diane could hear the bakery in the background. The soft percussion of a commercial kitchen. Something sliding out of an oven. Tell me everything, Carol said. I'll close in an hour. They sat at Carol's kitchen table that evening. The bakery was quiet. The display case still held a few remaining pastries. The air smelled of cardamom and butter and brown sugar, the way it always did, the way Diane had always found unreasonably comforting. She told Carol everything. The luncheon, Eleanor's house, the tea, the 3 years. Carol was quiet when Diane finished. 4 full seconds of silence, which was unusual for Carol. 3 years, Carol said. 3 years, Diane confirmed. Carol poured more coffee into both their mugs. Okay, she said. I need to tell you something. and I need you to hear it without being angry with me. Because I've been sitting on this and it's time. Diane looked at her. I knew something was wrong, Carol said. Not the specifics. Not I didn't know about anyone specific, but I could feel it when I was around you two. This particular kind of off. And I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself you would tell me when you were ready. And I stayed out of it. She met Diane's eyes, and I felt bad about that ever since the divorce. I'm sorry. I should have said something. Diane looked at her best friend. This was not what she had expected Carol to say. You couldn't have known what I didn't let myself know, Diane said slowly. Maybe, Carol said, but I could have asked. I could have created space for you to say it out loud, and I didn't. There was a particular kind of grace in what Carol was doing. Diane recognized it, the willingness to sit inside your own failure without defending it, to offer it plainly as a form of honesty. You saw it in your body, Carol continued. That's why you kept rearranging things, why you kept trying to fix the feeling by fixing the house. Your body knew. Your brain just couldn't hold the two things at once, that the man you loved and built your life with was choosing to deceive you every single day. Diane sat with that. She thought about the bedroom, the pillows, the therapist who said phase. He told her she was imagining things, she said, not accusingly, just naming it. Yes, Carol said, and I believed him. Because I loved him, and because I thought love meant trusting someone's version of reality over your own when the two conflicted. That's not love, Carol said. That's training. The word landed quietly. Training, like something you didn't choose, like something that happened to you gradually, in small increments, until the behavior was so embedded you couldn't see where the training ended, and you began. Diane thought about all the ways she had made herself smaller over 12 years. Not in big ways, in small ones. The things she didn't say at dinner parties because Grant had a look when she talked too much. The opinions she softened because he found her certainty occasionally abrasive. The way she moved through rooms at his events, present but deferential. Visible but not too visible. She had thought this was partnership. She had thought this was the negotiation of two people sharing a life. I was being managed, she thought, gently, consistently, for years, and I cooperated because I didn't know that's what it was. She drove home after Carol's with the windows cracked. The October night was cold and clear. She thought about Oliver. She needed to tell him more, not everything, not all of it, but more than he currently knew. She thought about Eleanor starting over at 74. Calling her ex-daughter-in-law for help because she had run out of people she could trust with the truth. She thought about the legal pad folded in her bag. She thought, the hardest part is not what he did. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along, and I chose not to. Not because she was weak, because she was loving. And there was a difference, understanding that difference that was going to take some time. But she was starting, a Tuesday. 3 weeks after the luncheon, Diane was in Philip Reed's office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with a folder of documents related to an outstanding matter from the divorce settlement. A property overpayment dispute, the kind of thing that required a specialist to assess, and a significant amount of paperwork that she had organized into a manila folder with dividers. Because that was how she processed things she didn't want to deal with, she made them orderly. Philip Reed was 49. He had been her divorce attorney. He was competent and precise, and he listened to her in a way that felt different from how Grant had listened. Grant had listened with the part of his mind that was already formulating his response. Philip actually waited until she finished. He was reviewing the documents now, turning pages with the focused attention of someone who read for precision, not speed. He paused on a page near the back of the folder. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at her. This account, he said. He was careful with his voice. Neutral. The way lawyers are careful when they need the other person to stay calm. Were you aware of this account at the time of the original settlement? She looked at the document. She was not familiar with the account number. She was not familiar with the institution. She would have been familiar with both of those things if the account had been properly disclosed. No, she said. What followed was 40 minutes of careful conversation. Patient. Methodical. Philip moved through the documentation with the precision of someone who had done this before. Not this specific situation, but this specific shape of situation. An offshore account. Not enormous by Grant's standards. Significant by most standards. Established 18 months before the divorce proceedings began. Not disclosed in the financial documents provided during settlement. Not disclosed. She sat across from Philip's desk and absorbed this. This may be actionable, Philip said. Potentially significantly so. I understand, she said. She left his office at 3:15. She sat in her car in the parking garage. She did not call anyone for 22 minutes. She sat with the knowledge, not the number, not the illegal implications. Those were real, but they weren't what she was sitting with. She was sitting with what the account meant. You don't accidentally establish an offshore account. You sit down, you make appointments, you fill out paperwork, you make decisions about where to move money and how to protect it, and what name it should be in and what will happen to it if things go a certain way. He had sat down and made those decisions while she was in their house, while she was raising Oliver, while she was keeping dinners warm and planning anniversary trips and buying new pillows, trying to fix a distance she could feel but couldn't name. He had been building an exit, quietly, carefully, while she was building a marriage. She texted Carol, "Just 4 words, I need a walk." Carol texted back in under a minute. Park. 15 minutes. Coming. At the park, the trees were past their peak color, late October. Most of the leaves already down, covering the path in layers of rust and gold and brown. The air was cold enough to see their breath. Diane told Carol about the account. Carol walked beside her and did not say anything immediately. This was the correct response, and Diane loved her for it. He was planning, Diane said. She heard her own voice. It was steady. She was surprised by the steadiness. It wasn't a mistake he fell into and couldn't get out of. He built the exit. He built it while I was. She stopped walking. The anger arrived. Not the hot kind that makes you shake and shout. The cold kind. The kind that moves through you like clarity rather than chaos. The kind that makes everything suddenly perfectly legible. I see you, she thought. Not to grant the person. To the whole shape of it, I see exactly what this was. She had been managed. She had been maintained. She had been kept slightly uncertain, slightly anxious, slightly off balance in ways too small to name. Not through cruelty. Through a kind of careful, ongoing cultivation of her self-doubt. You're worrying too much, babe. You catastrophize sometimes. You know that. You take things so personally. She had a word for all of it now. Several words. She had learned them in therapy, one at a time, the way you learn a language you should have grown up speaking. I want to pursue the legal option, she told Carol, the one that requires full disclosure, the one that has visibility. Carol nodded. Because the truth is the truth, Diane said, and I have been adjusting my version of it for his comfort for 12 years. I am done doing that. They walked for another 20 minutes without talking much. Just walking. Just the leaves under their feet, and the cold air, and the particular companionship of two women in their 40s who have known each other long enough to understand that some things don't need filling with words. That evening, Oliver called. He was back at college. He had heard something, not from Diane, but through the particular family telephone that always managed to transmit wrong information at the right moment. Some version of what was happening had reached him, filtered and distorted by its root. "Mom," he said. "What's going on with Grandma Eleanor? What's been happening?" She took a breath. She told him the version she could tell. The luncheon. The pattern Margaret had described. Eleanor calling her to the house. The decision Eleanor had made about her position on the committee. Oliver listened without interrupting. That was a quality of his she had always marveled at. He had learned to listen from somewhere. She liked to think she'd had something to do with it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Since February," she said. Another silence. "And Dad knows?" "Eleanor has told him." "Yes." She could hear him breathing. She could hear him making decisions about what to say. "I'm angry," he said finally. "I know. At him specifically. Not just at the situation. At him specifically." "I know," she said again. "Mom." His voice shifted, got quieter, more deliberate. "I want you to know something. Whatever this turns into, however complicated it gets, I'm on your side. Not because he's wrong about everything, but because I know you, and I know what you've been through, and I know who you've been through it as, and I'm on your side." She pressed her free hand over her mouth. She held herself together. "Thank you, baby," she said. "That means everything." After they hung up, she sat with the phone in her lap for a long time. She thought about the offshore account, about the 3 years, about Eleanor's hands in her lap at the head table. She thought, I did not lose everything. I have Oliver. I have Carol. I have this studio, this business, this life I have been quietly building in the margin of someone else's. I did not lose everything. I found out what I actually had. A Friday evening in early November, Grant hosted a dinner party, formal, catered. The kind of event that served multiple purposes simultaneously. It was business and social and personal, all at once. The way wealthy men arranged their lives so that different categories of obligation could be satisfied in the same evening. He had invited Eleanor. He always invited Eleanor. Whatever else Grant Calloway was, he maintained his filial obligations with consistency, if not with particular attentiveness. He had not invited Diane. She had not expected to be. But Oliver had come home for a long weekend, a surprise. He had texted her Friday morning, catching a train. "Don't make dinner. I'll bring pizza." She had sat down on her kitchen floor with the text in her hand, which was not a dignified response, but it was the honest one. Oliver had been invited to the dinner party because he was Grant's son, and because a dinner party that excluded the 22-year-old son would have been conspicuous. So he went. He had not told Diane he was going until after. He had, however, called her from inside the dinner party. She was home, bathrobe, herbal tea, a design journal, and a pencil in an evening she had decided she deserved. She had been beginning slowly and with some conscious effort to believe she was entitled to quiet evenings that no one interrupted with new information. Her phone rang at 8:43. "Oliver," she answered. His voice was controlled in the specific way that meant it was barely controlled. "Mom," he said, "I need your advice, right now, while I still have space to take it." "Tell me," she said, he told her. The seating arrangement. Eleanor placed at the far end of the table, near the kitchen exit. Eleanor, who had sat at the head of this family's table for 40 years, placed near the kitchen exit. The centerpiece comment. Petra saying to the couple from Greenwich, in her practiced light way, that she had chosen the elaborate floral arrangements, because Eleanor had always used such small, understated centerpieces, but she had wanted something with more impact, said conversationally, said pleasantly, said in a way that positioned Eleanor as a style era that had been tastefully updated. Eleanor, across the table, had smiled. "I know that smile," Diane said. "What smile?" "The one that means she's keeping herself at the table. That she's decided she's not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her leave." "Yeah," Oliver said. "That smile exactly." She pressed her palm flat against the couch cushion. She breathed. "Go back in," she said. "Don't make a scene. Don't confront anyone. Don't give Petra something to react to. Mom, Oliver, listen to me. Go back in and sit next to Grandma Eleanor, on her left side if you can manage it without being obvious. Just be there. Just be next to her. That's everything. That is the whole thing." A pause. "You sure? Being present with someone who's being made to feel alone is not nothing," she said. "It's everything." "Go." "Okay," he said. "Okay." He hung up. She sat with her herbal tea. It had gone cold while they were talking. She sat with the cold tea and the quiet kitchen and the navy bathrobe and the design journal she was not going to be able to return to tonight. And she let herself feel it. All of it. Without management, without performance, without the careful calibration she had been applying to her own grief since the divorce, the measured processing, the therapeutic frameworks, the appropriate sized feelings she had been trained to allow herself. She felt the unfairness of it. She felt the grief not for Grant. She had moved through that grief. It had its own geography. And she had mapped it, but for the version of life she had believed she was building. The 12 years she had organized herself around someone who was, she now knew, simultaneously organizing himself around an exit. She felt something on behalf of Eleanor, old and stubborn and dignified Eleanor, sitting at the end of the table near the kitchen door in her own family's home wearing that smile. And she felt something older and more personal than any of that. She was plus size. She had been plus size her entire adult life. She had moved through the world in a body that other people had opinions about. She had walked into rooms and felt the adjustment, the small recalibration of how she was going to be perceived. She had felt it with Grant too. Not always, not openly, but in small ways. The pause before her name at certain introductions. The way he had once, early in their marriage, mentioned in passing that she might enjoy a certain fitness class a colleague's wife was attending. She had gone to the class. She had done everything she could to make herself the right size for someone else's comfort. "I was never too much," she thought now in the quiet kitchen with the cold tea. "I was exactly enough. I have always been exactly enough. And I spent 12 years making myself smaller for someone who was going to leave regardless." She cried on the couch for a long time. Not the parking lot crying, deeper than that. The kind that reaches down to things you have been holding since before you knew you were holding them. The kind that cleans something out. When it stopped, she washed her face in the kitchen sink. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink. She said it out loud. "I am not going to disappear. Not for him, not for her, not for anyone's comfort, not anymore." It was quiet in the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked. She made fresh tea. She sat back down. She picked up the design journal. She was not done for the evening. She was not going to be done. 2 weeks later, early November, something had shifted. Diane noticed it the way you notice the change in light between seasons, not a single moment, but an accumulation. The angle of things. The quality of the air. She was moving through her days differently. With less apology. She was in Philip's office again on a Thursday morning. This time not with the tired logistics of an overpayment dispute. This time with intention. He outlined 2 legal approaches to the undisclosed account. The first, a quiet negotiation, private. Grant's attorneys would be contacted. A supplemental settlement would be reached. Low visibility, faster resolution, a smaller return. The second, formal litigation. Financial records formally requested, a filing that would become, at minimum, semi-public. Grant's name in the documentation. The implication, clear and documented, that the original settlement had not been fully transparent. Significantly higher return. "Which do you want?" Philip asked. He asked it simply. No editorial, no leading the witness. She thought about it for a genuine moment. She was not performing consideration. She was actually considering. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago. Sitting across from the divorce attorney Philip, even then, and asking, in a voice she had made small, whether her demands were reasonable, whether what she was asking for was appropriate, whether she was sure, she had been sure, she had just needed someone to tell her it was acceptable to be sure. The second approach, she said, that's the one that minus. I know which one it is, she said, not because I want to cause damage, but because the truth is the truth, and I am finished adjusting my version of it for his convenience. Philip looked at her, not the way lawyers look at clients when they're assessing strategy. Something else. Okay, he said. He wrote something in his notes. Then that's what we pursue. She drove back to the studio feeling the particular clarity that comes from making a decision that aligns with who you actually are. Not who you were trained to be, who you actually are. That same week, Eleanor called on a Wednesday evening. Diane was eating dinner, rice, roasted vegetables. Something quiet and nourishing she had made for herself because she had remembered that making herself good meals was a form of self-respect she had let lapse. I've made a decision, Eleanor said. Diane waited. I'm resigning from the luncheon committee. Diane set down her fork. Eleanor, let me finish, Eleanor said. Her voice was composed. She had clearly been composing this. I've thought about it carefully, for a while now, and I've decided I'm not being pushed out. I'm choosing to leave. There is a difference. She wants me to vanish slowly, with diminishing returns, until no one notices I'm gone. That is not how this ends. She paused. I'm leaving on my terms, in my time, for my reasons. Diane pressed her lips together. She thought about how much Eleanor had absorbed over the past 8 months. Quietly, alone, processing it the way women of Eleanor's generation processed things privately with enormous dignity in the kitchen while making tea. What will you do? Diane asked. I've been speaking with the young woman who gave the address at the luncheon, Eleanor said. The one from the mentorship program. Her name is Jenna. She's extraordinary. She has been trying to expand the program's reach, and she doesn't have the network to do it yet. A pause. I have the network, Eleanor said simply. Something lifted in Diane's chest. Something that had been compressed since February, since all of this began, loosened slightly and rose. I'm going to start a small mentorship group, Eleanor continued, focused on young women entering law, finance, medicine. Women who need access to the rooms they haven't been let into yet. Eleanor, Diane said. That's remarkable. It's what I know how to do, Eleanor said. I've been letting someone make me feel like what I know isn't valuable anymore. I've decided to stop participating in that. They talked for another 20 minutes about the structure of the group, about the women Eleanor had already reached out to, about Jenna, who had apparently responded to Eleanor's call within 4 hours with a 3-page document of ideas. When they hung up, Diane sat at her kitchen table. She thought about women choosing themselves. At 22 and at 46 and at 74. The same choice, at different angles, with different stakes, requiring different courage. She thought about Philip asking which approach she wanted. She thought about Eleanor saying, I'm choosing to leave. She thought about herself standing up in the ballroom 3 weeks ago. 3 women deciding, in their different ways, not to be managed anymore. She finished her dinner. She washed her plate. She was aware in a peripheral way that when Philip had looked at her across his desk that morning, there had been something in that look. Not unprofessional, nothing like that. Just human. The look of one person recognizing another. She filed this awareness carefully. She was not ready to do anything with it. But she was not going to pretend it wasn't there. She had spent enough years pretending things weren't there. A Monday, mid-November, 3:45 in the afternoon. Diane was at her studio working on a client project. A young couple buying their first home together. The woman had a very clear sense of what she wanted and couldn't articulate it yet. Diane's favorite kind of client. She enjoyed the translation. Turning a feeling into a room. The studio door opened. She looked up. Grant Calloway stood in the doorway. He looked the same. He always looked the same. That was his particular kind of privilege. The world did not mark him the way it marked others. He was 51 and he looked 45, and he moved through rooms with the ease of someone who had never had reason to doubt his welcome. He glanced around the studio. The mood boards, the samples, the particular organized disorder of a creative workspace. She saw him register it, file it, make some small assessment she didn't have access to. You could have called, she said. I know, he said. I wasn't sure you'd answer. That was probably true. She gestured to the chair on the other side of her work table, the chair she used for client consultations. He sat in it. I know you're pursuing the litigation, he said. I am, she said. He looked at her the way he used to look at her when she said something that didn't compute. A slight adjustment, a small recalibration. I would like to find a way through this that doesn't become public, he said. I understand that, she said. What I want is to be compensated fairly for what was omitted in the original settlement. Those two things may or may not be compatible. He shifted in the chair. He was not used to this version of conversations with her. She could tell. He had come in with a strategy measured, reasonable, the way he handled everything, and the strategy had assumed a certain Diane, the one who softened, the one who considered his discomfort alongside her own, and weighted his heavily. "I want to talk about my mother," he said. She waited. "I appreciate that you've been spending time with her," he said. "I do, but things are complicated right now." "The dynamics between Eleanor and Petra are Grant," she said. He stopped unkind, not sharp, just clear. The particular clarity of someone who has finally stopped letting sentences be buried under qualifications. "Your mother has been systematically humiliated at every social gathering she's attended for almost a year," she said, "by the woman you chose. You've been told about this, by Eleanor herself, multiple times. And your consistent response has been to ask everyone around you to extend more understanding, to be patient, to give it time." He said nothing. "I'm not saying this to attack you," she continued. "I'm genuinely not angry with you right now. But I am not going to participate in managing your discomfort about this situation. Eleanor matters to me. She has always mattered to me. That doesn't stop because our marriage ended." He looked at his hands on her work table. She noticed his hands. She had known those hands for 15 years. "I've made mistakes," he said. "Yes," she said, "more than you know." "Eleanor told me the timeline," she said. "Philip found the account. I know fairly well." Something moved across his face. She watched it happen. It was not a small thing. She had seen Grant Calloway face complicated business situations with equanimity. She had seen him navigate social difficulties without expression. She had never, in 15 years, seen him look the way he looked right now. Ashamed. Genuinely, unstrategically ashamed. "I did love you," he said. "I need you to know that. It's important to me that you know it." She took that sentence and examined it carefully. "I believe you," she said. "I do. I also believe you loved yourself more. I believe you made choices in the dark that you couldn't make honestly in the light. And I believe I made it easier for you to do that by spending 12 years doubting my own perception whenever it conflicted with yours." He was very still. "I want a fair settlement," she said. "I want Eleanor to be treated with dignity by the people around her. And I want to finish this meeting so I can get back to my client work." He stood. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. He looked at her for a long moment. "You seem different," he said. She looked back at him without moving. "I'm the same," she said. "You just stopped looking." He left. The door closed behind him. She sat with the silence of the studio for a moment. She pressed both palms flat on the work table. She felt the solid surface under her hands. She breathed in and out twice. Then she picked up her pencil. She went back to the client project, the couple's living room. The woman who knew what she wanted and couldn't say it yet. Diane was good at that. Finding the feeling, building the room around it. She had been doing it her whole life. She was only now learning to do it for herself. The third Saturday in November, the Ridgemont Arts Center annual gala. The event of the season in a town that took its season seriously. Grant was a significant donor. His name was on a wall in the building. He would be there. Petra would be there. Eleanor had told Diane in a phone call the previous week that she intended to be there as well. "You don't have to," Diane had said. "I know I don't have to," Eleanor had said with the patient emphasis of a woman who had heard this specific form of softening one too many times. "I want to, on my terms." Diane had called Carol. "I'm going," she said. "Obviously you're going," Carol said. "I've been waiting for you to say it. What are you wearing?" They spent 45 minutes on the phone deciding. Not the safe navy dress. Something else. Something that said she knew who she was in this room. She wore deep burgundy, a wrap style with a full skirt and a neckline that was elegant without apology. She wore earrings she had bought 2 years ago and saved for an occasion worthy of them. She wore heels she could actually walk in, which was, she had decided, the only kind worth owning. She arrived with Carol and Margaret Winslow, who had texted her earlier that week with a message that required no translation: "Wear something spectacular. I'll see you there." The ballroom was beautiful. November gala lighting, warm, low, the kind that turns a room golden. Black tie, the smell of champagne and hothouse flowers and expensive perfume. The particular ambient sound of a room full of people performing their social best. Eleanor was near the entrance, receiving old friends. She wore dark green, a structured jacket and a long skirt, dark green like winter pine, with pearl earrings and her white hair set precisely. She was the room. She had always been the room. Petra's months of careful diminishment had not managed to change that. Diane took Eleanor's arm. "You look like yourself," Diane said. "I feel like myself," Eleanor said. "It's been a while." They stood together near the entrance and greeted people. Margaret joined them. A few other women Diane had known through years of Ridgemont's social life came over warmly, deliberately, the way people come over when they want to signal something by proximity. Across the ballroom, Grant arrived with Petra in white, which was a choice. She scanned the room with efficient elegance, professional habit. Grant had said she was an events coordinator, and she had clearly never stopped evaluating rooms. She found Diane almost immediately. Something recalibrated in her expression. Just barely, just enough to notice if you were looking. Diane did not look away. She simply held her ground in the way a person holds ground when they know exactly where they're standing and why. The evening moved. Cocktails, toasts, dancing after dinner. The choreography of a charitable gala, each movement prescribed by decades of repetition. Diane danced once with Carol and once with Margaret's husband, who was 80, and still led with confidence. She ate her dinner. She drank one glass of champagne. She talked to people she hadn't seen in 2 years. Some of the conversations were awkward in the brief, navigable way of bumping into someone who knew you when you were someone else's wife. Most were warmer than she'd expected. People had not forgotten her. She had been forgetting herself. Then, near the end of the evening, Petra moved through the room toward the area where Diane and Eleanor were standing with Margaret and two other women. She was moving with a specific kind of purpose that Diane recognized. The approach of someone who has decided to reclaim territory. She arrived. She smiled. "Eleanor," she said warmly, "I was just telling Grant I'd hoped to have you at our table tonight. There wasn't quite enough room, unfortunately, but I wanted you to know we thought of you." The circle was quiet. Margaret Winslow set down her champagne glass on a nearby table. She did this with the deliberate, unhurried precision of someone who is creating a moment. "How strange," Margaret said. Her voice was mild, perfectly pleasant. The voice of a woman who has been in rooms like this for 50 years and has calibrated every register of them. Eleanor mentioned she was placed at a table near the service entrance. "I noticed because I wondered after 11 years of organizing this event why the founding committee member was so far from the center of the room." Silence. "And actually," Margaret continued, equally pleasantly, "I saw the seating chart before dinner. These things are always posted near the entrance. I noticed it specifically." Petra's smile remained, but something behind it went very still. "These arrangements can be confusing," Petra said. "There are so many moving pieces, of course," Diane said. She said it warmly, without edge, without performance. "These things happen," she said. And then she turned back to the conversation she had been having with the woman on her left, naturally, without drama, as though the moment had simply concluded, which it had. Petra had nowhere to go. The circle continued. The conversation resumed. A few minutes later, Petra excused herself gracefully and moved to another part of the room. Eleanor looked at Diane. She said nothing for a moment. She simply looked at her. Then she said, quietly, in a voice that was only for Diane, "That is exactly how it's done." Diane smiled. Not triumphant, not satisfied in any competitive sense, just right. The feeling of something handled with the full weight of its dignity and not 1 ounce more force than necessary. Later, in the car home, Carol said, "You know what you just did in there?" "I sat at a dinner," Diane said. "You changed the air in that room," Carol said, "without making a single scene, without raising your voice once. You just changed what was possible." Diane drove. The November streets were empty and lit with orange street lamps. "Eleanor did it," she said. "She showed up. That was the thing. You made it possible for her to show up," Carol said. "That's different from doing it for her. You gave her company. You gave her somewhere to stand." Diane thought about that. Company, a somewhere to stand. She thought about the 22-year-old Jenna, who had sent Eleanor a 3-page document of ideas within 4 hours. About all the young women who were going to benefit from Eleanor's network, and Eleanor's decades of knowledge, and Eleanor's particular kind of iron grace. She thought about rooms. The room she built for other people. The room she had been learning to build for herself. She thought, you cannot give someone a somewhere to stand if you haven't found your own. She drove home through the orange-lit streets. She realized, deeply content. Not happy in a performed way, not okay in a managed way, actually genuinely, quietly content. She hadn't felt that in longer than she could accurately remember. 3 weeks after the gala, a Thursday morning, Diane was at her studio before 9. The legal settlement document was in her email. Philip had sent it the previous evening with a brief note. "Review this. Call me tomorrow morning if you have questions. I think you'll find it satisfactory." She had read it the night before. She had read it twice. She had set it aside and made dinner and come back to it after and read it a third time. She printed it. She sat with the printed pages at her work table in the morning light. The settlement was fair. More than fair. It was honest. It was what the numbers should have been 2 years ago if all the numbers had been on the table. Philip had negotiated it quietly, over 3 weeks, with Grant's attorneys. Grant had, as Philip had predicted, preferred a private resolution to formal litigation. The documents he would have been required to produce in litigation were not documents he wanted produced. She picked up a pen. She thought about the woman who had sat across from a divorce attorney 2 years ago and asked, in a careful small voice, if she was being reasonable. She signed the settlement. She set the pen down. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel triumphant. She had imagined this moment in the way you imagine things you're working toward, with a certain imagined satisfaction attached to the completion of them. What she actually felt was quieter than that, more settled. The feeling of something that was supposed to be right, finally becoming right. Like a picture frame that had been slightly askew for 2 years, finally level. She called Philip. I signed, she said. Good, he said. She could hear him smiling. How do you feel? Level, she said. A brief pause. That's a good word, he said. I had a good attorney, she said. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh. She had noticed over the past several weeks that Philip Reed had a genuine laugh. It came from somewhere real. About the Italian place on Crane Street, he said, and then he stopped. She could hear him making a decision about how to continue. I've been meaning to ask whether you'd like to have dinner sometime. This is not a professional conversation. I want to be clear about that. This would be an entirely separate. Yes, she said. A pause. Yes, he said. Yes, she said again. I'd like that. Another pause. This one warmer. Friday, he said. Friday, she said. She hung up. She sat with that for a moment. The smallness of it. A dinner. Just a dinner. The smallest possible beginning of something. She thought about how terrifying small beginnings had seemed 2 years ago. The idea of existing outside the structure of her marriage. The idea of a life that was organized around herself rather than around someone else. She had thought it would feel like falling. It felt like standing. Oliver called that afternoon. He was back at college in the particular thick of semester-end work, and yet he called. The settlement's done? He asked. How did you? She started. Mom, he said. Philip told me. I called him. She laughed. You called my attorney? In my defense, Oliver said, he was very professional about it. He just confirmed it was finalized. He didn't tell me anything specific. He shouldn't have confirmed anything. He likes you, Oliver said. People who like you want good things to happen to you. This is a fact. She shook her head. She was smiling. She was aware she was smiling in the way you're aware of sun on your face. Mom, Oliver said. His voice went quieter. Steedier, I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it without deflecting. Okay, she said. I watched you go through all of this, he said, the past 2 years. And I watched you go through it without becoming mean. Without becoming someone who wanted to burn things down. Without losing yourself, the actual you. You went through something genuinely terrible, and you came out the other side still you. Still the person who walks across a ballroom to pick up a program. Still the person who calls me from the couch at 10 p.m. when I sound off and won't let me pretend I'm fine. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I'm proud of you, he said. I know that's supposed to go the other direction. I know I'm 22 and you're supposed to be proud of me. But I'm proud of you, and I wanted to say it. She could not speak for a moment. She made herself. I love you, she said, more than you will ever fully understand. I know, he said. Grandma Eleanor wants to do Sunday dinner. She's making the pot roast. Tell her I'll bring the wine, Diane said. She said to tell you she knows you'll bring the wine. She also said to bring the good kind, not the kind you brought to her birthday dinner. Diane laughed out loud. She specifically said that? Those exact words, Oliver said. She seemed very clear on the topic. She laughed for a long time, the real kind. The kind that comes from deep down, from somewhere that hasn't been accessed in a while. The kind that surprises you with its own volume. When she stopped, she felt light. Genuinely physically light. She thought, this is what's on the other side. Not triumph, not resolution. Just this, pot roast, good wine, a son who calls. A room that smells like Eleanor's candle. She thought, I made it to the other side. That evening, she looked at the society section of the local paper online. Old habit. She sometimes looked on Thursday evenings. The engagement announcement was there. Grant and Petra, a formal portrait. The kind you hire a photographer for. They looked well matched. They looked assembled. Grant was smiling the smile he used for photographs. Petra's hand was on his arm with the proprietary ease of someone who has won the thing she wanted. She read the announcement once. She set the phone down. She did not feel what she had expected to feel when this day finally arrived. She had been bracing for it on some level since the divorce. The announcement, the formalization of the thing, the public version of it. She felt mostly nothing, not nothing in the numb way, nothing in the complete way, nothing in the way of a chapter you've finished. You can see the last page, the words are still there, but you've already put it down. She felt something else too, something near relief. Because whatever Grant and Petra had built together, that was their story, not hers. She did not have to live in it. She had not been destroyed by it. She had been reorganized by it, restructured, moved from a room that had never quite fit into one she was building herself. She recycled the paper. She went to bed at 10:30. She slept well, a Saturday in mid-December. Early morning, 6:50. Diane was in the studio before the winter light had finished arriving. She had a travel mug of coffee. She was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and the old canvas sneakers she wore on weekends when no one was going to see her. She was standing in front of a blank mood board. This was unusual. Her mood boards were never blank for long. She moved quickly when she was working the client conversation still in her ear, the images already assembling in her mind before she sat down, the feeling of the room already clarifying itself. She was good at fast. But this board was for herself, and she was discovering that herself required more time than other people. She had signed the lease on the new apartment 2 weeks ago. Top floor, north-facing windows, high ceilings, a second bedroom that could be a studio, better light than anywhere she had lived since before the marriage. She had stood in the empty apartment the day she signed, and she had turned around in the main room slowly, looking at the walls, the proportions, the way the afternoon light came through the west windows. She had thought, I can do something extraordinary in here. Now she stood at the blank board with her coffee and she started pinning things. Slowly, deliberately, not with the professional confidence of a designer working a project, with the tentative, genuine consideration of someone who is trying to find out what she actually wants, what she would choose if nobody was watching, if no one's comfort was part of the equation. A velvet swatch. Deep rust. The color of October oak leaves 2 weeks past their peak. She ran her thumb over it, pressed it to the board. A wide plank floor sample, warm walnut, the kind that felt like history under your feet. A print she had loved for 5 years and never bought. A botanical illustration, antique in style, extravagant in detail, a bird of paradise rendered in watercolor with absolute care. She had looked at it in a gallery in the city, and she had not bought it because at the time she had thought, where would it go? Whose house is this going in? Does it belong? She pressed it to the board. It belonged. An oversized reading chair in warm yellow. Not careful yellow. Not restrained yellow. A full declarative yellow. The kind that made a room say something. She had been looking at this chair for 4 months. She had told herself it was too much. It was not too much. She pressed the image to the board. A mirror. Large. Hammered gold frame. The kind you don't buy to make a room look bigger. The kind you buy because it's beautiful, and because you deserve to look into something beautiful when you pass by it. She pressed the mirror image to the board. She stepped back. She looked at it. It was a beginning. The bones of a room. A room that didn't apologize for anything it contained. A room that was warm and full and specific. A room that said someone particular lives here. Someone who has made decisions about what she loves. She thought about Eleanor, who was hosting a Sunday dinner tomorrow, who had spent the past 3 weeks calling women she had known for decades, and women she had just met through Jenna, building the mentorship group from a conversation into a structure, who had told Diane on the phone last week that she had 7 confirmed participants for the first session and was expecting 2 more. Jenna says we should meet monthly, Eleanor had said. I told her quarterly was more manageable. We compromised on 6 weeks. You compromised, Diane had said. I'm capable of compromise, Eleanor had said. I just prefer not to. She thought about Carol, who had texted her yesterday a photo of a new cardamom pastry she was testing with the caption, "You're my first call if this goes wrong," which was the highest form of Carol's affection. She thought about Oliver, finishing his final semester, planning to move back to the area in the spring. Looking at apartments with what she could only describe as the specific seriousness of a young man who had decided to take his own life seriously. She thought about Friday. Dinner with Philip at the Italian place on Crane Street. They had talked for 3 hours. She had not once performed composure. She had not once softened a sentence or managed an impression. She had just been there, present, actual. At the end of the evening, standing outside on the cold sidewalk, he had said, I'd like to do this again. She had said, so would I. She had driven home feeling something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten the texture of it. Something like being seen. Being seen and found interesting. Being seen and found worth knowing. She had not allowed herself to build any kind of superstructure around that feeling. She was 46, and she was a year out of therapy, and she was not interested in narrative. She was interested in what was actually in front of her, but it was there, and she was not pretending it wasn't. She turned back to the mood board. She reached for the last thing she had brought to the studio this morning, a paint sample. She had found it in a stack of samples she'd been accumulating for months, assembling possibilities without fully knowing for what. She looked at it now. Deep sage green, the color of Eleanor's gown at the gala. She had not made this connection consciously. She had pulled the sample from the stack because it felt right, because it matched the quality of something she was trying to put into the room. Something old and considered and rooted, something that had weathered and come through and was still, fundamentally, itself. She pressed the sage green to the board. She stepped back again. She looked at the whole board. Rust and walnut and yellow and gold and sage green. Warm and full and considered and unafraid. That's the room, she thought. That's the room. She picked up her coffee. It was still warm. Outside the studio windows, the first snow of the season was falling. It had started while she was looking at the board, unhurried. The kind of snow that arrives like it, has nowhere particular to be but has decided to be here. The light outside was that specific December morning light, gray and soft and clean. She watched the snow for a moment. She thought about the woman who had sat in the back of a ballroom 2 months ago in a navy wrap dress she'd almost returned, who had chosen the back, who had ordered sparkling water and told herself that peripheral was fine, that invisible was manageable. She thought about the woman who had reorganized the bedroom in year 2, who had bought new pillows, who had told a therapist she was going through a phase and believed it because it was easier than the alternative. She thought about the woman who had kept dinner warm on Thursday nights, in a covered dish, in the oven, making sure the food stayed good for someone who had already decided to go. She said out loud, in the quiet studio, to no one but herself in the falling snow, "I spent a very long time making myself invisible in rooms that were never designed for me. I thought that was love. I thought that taking up less space was a form of giving, that making myself smaller was a form of generosity." She paused. It wasn't. The snow kept falling. Loving well means being present, fully present, your actual size, your real voice, the full weight of who you are. You cannot give someone a somewhere to stand if you are standing nowhere yourself. And you cannot share a real room, a life room, if you've erased yourself from the blueprint. She turned back to the board. She looked at the deep sage green sample. She thought about Eleanor at the gala. Dark green, pearl earrings, white hair set precisely. Saying, "I feel like myself. It's been a while." She thought about what it cost to feel like yourself after a long time of being made to feel like less. And she thought about what it meant to get there, what it required. Not a single dramatic moment, not a confrontation or a revelation or a victory. Just small decisions accumulated. Sitting back down when you wanted to run, standing up when you wanted to disappear, calling an attorney, picking up a program, walking across a ballroom in a navy dress. Small decisions, every day. Until one morning you are standing in your own studio with a coffee and a paint sample and you look at the room you are about to build and you think, yes, that is exactly right. She pinned one final thing to the board. A fabric sample for curtains, linen, natural, unbleached light filtering. The kind that let the north light in without overwhelming it. The kind that moved slightly in a draft. The kind that reminded you the outside was still there, still moving, still happening while you were warm and still and exactly where you chose to be. She stepped back. She looked at the full board, her room. The snow was coming harder now, committed, settling on the windowsill in a clean, quiet accumulation that built on itself without apology. She set down the coffee. She picked up a pencil. She began to draw the floor plan. The walls in sage green, the warm walnut floor, the yellow chair in the corner by the window, facing the north light, the hammered gold mirror above a low credenza, the botanical print on the wall beside the door, so it was the first thing she saw when she came home. A room designed by someone who knew what she loved. A room built at full size. She drew for a long time. Snow fell. The north light came up slowly and filled the studio. Outside, the city was waking up. Inside, Diane Calloway drew the room she had always deserved to live in, and it looked exactly like her.